quedé acá como apartada, me dejaron. No, me siento acá. Está bien. Me siento. Este como... Ah, está prendido. ¿Empezamos? Hello, everyone. Hi, we are about to start. Yeah? Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this session titled Sustainability of Production Systems in the Southern Corn Countries, Experiences and Developments in Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, that was organized by the Group of Producing Countries from the South, or GPS. My name is Maylen Salucio. I'm from APRESID, the Argentine No-Till Farmers Association, and I will be facilitating this session today. Well, joining me on stage, we have Marcelo Torres, President of APRESID, Daniel Vargas, Bioeconomy Coordinator from Fundación Getúlio Vargas in Brazil, Francisco Lezama, Uruguay Forum Coordinator from GPS, and Ignacio Di Pascua, Project Management of INAC, the National Meat Institute from Uruguay. So at present, the world is faced with the tension posed by two major challenges, which are food security and climate change. These challenges are addressed differently according to the different contexts of the diverse regions. And countries from the southern corner of the Americas can position themselves as sustainable suppliers of food, bioenergy, and other products, environmental services, and bio-based technologies that are required by other regions that do not have the natural resources or the productive capacities to meet their current and future needs. In particular, the region has the opportunity to capture value through the differentiation of the environmental attributes of its productive systems that can improve adaptation and reduce the carbon footprint without compromising production levels. In order to communicate this more effectively, the development of science-based indicators is paramount. And during the last years, institutions from the 4 countries have been developing different instruments to characterize the sustainable attributes of their productive systems and value chains. Now they are developing coordinated and integrated projects to harmonize and communicate this data. So this session will address this integration process, and also each representative from the different countries will show some cases and practical examples of these initiatives. So each speaker will have 10 minutes to make a presentation, and then we will leave some time for some questions. And now I will leave the floor to Francisco Lezama, who will make an introduction about this project.
Really good question. Kind of one of those things where the data you get.
Thank you, Mei-Ling.
Thing to know is
Can we put the presentation? Okay.
Of course, we have folks who are really good at measuring it, but
The name of this presentation is Sustainability of Production Systems in Southern Countries. These countries are Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And we are going to show you some experiences and developments in these countries. First, we have Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay became the main world food net exporters. We have more or less, we have 30% of the market of export in the world. And this is based on the conservation and environmentally friendly sustainable food systems that we have. These countries are currently making substantial contributions to the challenge of providing not only healthy, nutritious, and high-quality food, but yes, in a sustainable manner. And they will continue doing it. We can first mark as steps some key aspects importance in the process of improvement that we have done, continuous process, and these innovations include, for example, first of all, no-tilling, no-till farming, replacing the traditional tillage, so we can make direct seeding, we reduce CO2 emissions, we enhance the soil life, and improving the efficiency of the rainwater. Another one is the pest resistance biotech seeds. We utilize seed resistance to insects and other pests, reducing the need for agrochemicals and moving towards biological control. And in that way, decreasing also CO2 emissions. Another innovation was the crop rotations, also including pastures, implementing crop rotations, incorporating pastures to minimize phytosanitary products usage, enhancing soil structure, and promoting soil conservation. Cover crops, another one, introducing cover crops to promote soil microbiology, increase carbon sequestration, and enhance water use efficiency once more. And the precision agriculture. In these countries, we adopt technologies to optimize input usage efficiency and natural resources conservation, water and soil, and reducing harvesting losses. Finally, livestock production, implementing production systems through pastures, grazing, and silvopastoral systems in these countries. This continuous improvement process enables sustainable food production by promoting an efficient utilization of natural resources while minimizing the adverse effects of climate change. And we have some successful experiences. They will talk about that, and that can serve as pillar for international cooperation. Some remarkable points. There is no singular model for sustainable development. We can say that the solution depends on the socio-economic realities and capabilities of each region of the planet. But it's important because this is why it's not wise to implement unilateral environment trade decisions by other countries. In contrast to developments in other regions, southern countries have massively adopted sustainable intensification production systems. Various public and public studies conducted in these 4 countries have measured the environmental impact of the region's product systems. They demonstrate highly positive, productive, and environmental impacts. And these valuable experiences can contribute to finding solutions in other regions facing productivity and sustainability challenges. International cooperation can play a significant role in this endeavor. We have in this region potential for further enhance global food security through sustainable and environmentally friendly systems. The progress has already been made. It's crucial to keep it on with the continuous improvement process, building on a better understanding of production systems and enhancement in the metrics used to analyze them. Over the past few years, our countries have conducted assessments of their respective productive activities, estimating their environmental impact indicators. Several of these examples will be presented today. But to gain a deeper understanding of the impacts of our production systems and to foster ongoing improvement, the four countries have decided to work together. This is very important. This joint effort aims at using international validated metrics or eventually improving them to provide a robust characterization of production systems and to have a more precise diagnosis of the current situation for future improvements. We are going to show some figures. We don't have today the participation of Paraguay. The lady cannot come here, but we have from Uruguay, Argentina, and Brazil some to see. And we are going to show you figures of this first step of this project, in which we can show how we are working today. But all this had a second step that we'll talk after that, after the presentations, in which on which we are thinking for the future. This is our future agenda: promote improvements process in the four countries in the production, with a base of communication what we are doing, because in many key world markets we noted a significant lack of awareness and in some cases negative basis against our production systems. But we need science-based studies, utilization these international recognized metrics that have been currently conducted jointly with contribute to appropriately position the capabilities of the countries. And simultaneously we'll offer a more accurate diagnosis for the current situation to strengthen the continuous improvement process, to adapt systems to new regulations, to develop schemes to allow for the differentiation of sustainability attributes and value the ecosystem services that they provide. Okay? Thank you.
Justo a tiempo.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Well, thank you, Francisco. Now we invite Marcelo Torres from Upper Seed to share the experiences in Argentina.
Okay, thank you. It's better, because I need the two hands to pass the... Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Ika, for inviting us to share our experience and visions about sustainable agriculture and the role of farmers in this process. We are sharing the current situation. We have trying to measure carbon footprint, carbon sequestration. We need to connect more with several actors and between organizations, but it's a point of start. I would like to begin the presentation by characterizing the agriculture productive system in Argentina. Here we can see some features. Over 90% of the agriculture area is under no-till. It's a growing trend to intensify crop rotation in humid regions. Around 50% of our crops used in the rotation are grasses, mostly wheat and corn. Increases presence of weed problems, increases also the use of cover crops, and growing trend to use less phytosanitary products. Another very important issue to highlight about the agriculture system, and is this mostly due to the large adoption of no-till, is the low carbon footprint measured in production chains, one of some essential crops such as corn and wheat. The study was conducted by National Institute of Industrial Technology, National Institute of Agriculture Technology, Change of Corn and Wheat, and Grain and Trade Stock Exchange. In the case of wheat, the same methodology was used, but the carbon footprint was measured from field cultivation to the production of products as kilogram of flour and kilogram of pasta, all the complete cycle of life. Our carbon footprint of corn and wheat are minor than the other one because no-till and crop rotation and using cover crops. Here we see a few indicators that characterize, in general terms, meat and milk production. In beef cattle breeding, as mostly carried out in pastoral systems with an average calf-cow ratio of 63%. Very not so high parameter. Rearing is also extensive pastoral in natural fields and implemented pastures, and annually 1/5 of the stock goes through the feedlot fattening stage for 2 months. Bovine dairying is mostly carried out in extensive pastoral systems. Initiative in Argentina. The other one, sorry. I would like to share with you some initiative on emissions and carbon sequestration that we are leading in Argentina. The first initiative we would like to share is the one carried out by CREA, Farmers Associations, Research Consortium of Agriculture Experimentation. The purpose of this study was to measure the environmental performance of their producers' farms in order to provide a tool to include the environmental dimension in field management decision making. The study measured different environmental variables, one of which was the intensity of greenhouse gas emission generated in the field in different products, grain, meat, or milk. For this purpose, they developed an emission calculator based on IPCC methodology and production data from their own producers' databases. The farmers usually share the information to compare agronomic indicators and yields and hybrids, sowing data, and with this information we could calculate also the carbon footprint. Emissions intensify in soybean. Emissions per ton of soybean as a first crop, as well as those that are part of double cropping scheme in 2 biomes. Emissions are estimated at the farm level following IPCC methodology. they do not consider emissions on removals resulting from change in the soil carbon. Emission intensified in livestock. Emission per kilogram of live weight by livestock system, breeding, rearing, fattening in 3 biomes. Emissions were estimated at farm level. Following the IPCC methodology, only enteric fermentation is considered and emissions or removal due to changes on the soil carbon are not considered. It is important to note the large variability shown in each box plot. This invites us to improve by analyzing drivers of this gap. We need to know about this difference and which is the drivers, and we need to compare the different producers and try to learn about this. Emission intensified diary. Finally, we see the chart that shows emission per kilogram of milk energy adjusted according to the diverse systems, pastoral with supplementing or dry lot in the Pamphian region. Emissions are estimated at farm levels following also the IPCC methodology. No considering emission or removal resulting from changes of soil carbon. This is the step I need to follow in the second step. Well, initiative from Argentine North-Till Farmers Association. I will show you an initiative led by the Argentine North-Till Farmers Association since our aim to regenerate and care the soil health. Our work focuses in finding out the organic carbon sequestration potential of agricultural soils in Argentina. All human activities generate emission. One of the only sectors that, in addition to emitting, can sequester CO2 from the atmosphere and be source of climate change mitigation is the agriculture sector. Why? Because it relies on two key allies, plant photosynthesis and soils. This carbon is incorporated into the soil, the largest terrestrial reservoir of organic carbon on the planet, becoming soil organic carbon. Taking this into consideration, we wonder what is the soil organic carbon storage capacity of Argentina's. What practice do we need to apply to maximize soil organic carbon sequestration rates and each situation? We can see here the current level on the left, the achievable level on the middle. We select the almost 200 farmers with best practice, and we determine the achievable level and the potential level in function of depth of the soil, soil texture, radiation, and temperature. This allows us to estimate the improve we can do in the carbon sequestration. In this way, we determine soil organic carbon gaps. The country agricultural soils are today at 46% of their maximum soil organic carbon storage capacity. By massively implementing the above practice, we could, the no-till plus crop rotation and using cover crops, we could increase this level by up to 20%, which would compensate that for more than half of the national emissions linked to agriculture. So, if all the farmers apply this kind of practice, we could reduce 40% our balance of carbons. We could improve 20% our level of carbon storage in soil. using the same crops, the same crop rotation, adding cover crops or no-till. Well, this is the final remarks, but including the voice of farmers in mitigation and adaptation strategy to fight climate change is crucial in order to provide tools. It's important the farmers addressing this model because we have a lot of environment, a lot of situations. We need the farmers are involved and close the gap between rhetoric and results. Together, APRESID and CREA project and GPS project summarize more than 1,000 farmers, more than 1.5 million hectares. Together, APRESID and CREA need to protocolize these models. And the first step is working in Argentina with other farmers associations, and the second, I mean, now we need to work together with Brazil, Paraguay, protocolize these systems, and could show information in the next COP, perhaps from the region. We believe that it's crucial to promote the role of farmers in the development of mitigation and adaptation strategies, as they know the system better than anyone else, as well as their needs and problems, and are they to success of the solution generated as they ensure that they are adapted to each of the production realities. Thank you. Sorry, Mike.
Well, thank you, Marcelo. Now we are inviting Daniel, who is going to share about the experiences from Brazil.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be able to join you in this event. I'd like to thank very much ICA, GPS, and I'd like to thank for the opportunity to share some of the concerns and some of the projects that we are currently treating as a priority in Brazil, which has to do with the challenge of the green transition in productive systems, in particular in agriculture and livestock as we have in the country. I'd like to start with two very quick contexts that I think are critical to understand where we are sitting at this moment, and then share 2 or 3 stories, depending on the time, through which I'm going to talk a bit how we are trying to overcome the challenge of measuring and evaluating emissions in food production in Brazil. So, only to start, it seems to me that we are currently living in a very particular moment of the history of green climate governance. And this has to do with one particular phenomenon. This is probably the first COP in which the priority, the key concern that moves most of the countries in discussing green transition are no longer in energy, but in the use of land. So yesterday, in one of the panels that is outside over there, there's the number of countries that have signed the declarations presented by the presidency of the COP about different topics. One of the declarations has to do with the end of fossil fuels. 47 countries signed the declaration. And the other declaration has to do with the transition of food systems. 147 countries, by the end of the day yesterday, had already signed the transition. That means that if we ask the key diplomatic leaders of our countries where the core of the problem with the green transition is at this moment, the answer might probably be in the production of food. And this might be interpreted as an irony, especially for a meeting like this taking place in a country which has its economy based on fossil fuels. And it's also an irony, considering that historically we have always looked at energy as one of the critical problems of the green transition. And we all know that unless we are able to fulfill the transition in the energy system, we might not be able to combat effectively climate change in the future. Having said that, I come to the second element of the context. This is a challenge for all countries that have the base of their economies organized around food systems. And it is a challenge, particularly to countries in the South, in the global South, which have begun to play this game of the green transition much more recently than traditional developed countries of the so-called Annex 1 of the Kyoto Protocol, which have already worked on the challenge of the green transition for at least 20 years, since they signed the Protocol Kyoto, and have therefore organized the metrics, the methodologies, and the infrastructure to support their policies to organize the green transition. We have begun to play this game since 2015, when the Paris Agreement went into force. But at the same time, the infrastructure based on which we can work to realize this transition is still under construction. We know that the metrics, the methodologies, and the criteria of attribution, according to which we evaluate what is green in the use of land, is still to a large extent being created by scientists, by governments, and by institutions like this ones. And Brazil is also part of that challenge. We are also very much concerned with what that means to us. And we are also working to give our contribution and to support our economy in accelerating our green transition in the land system. What we've done at the Bioeconomy Observatory that was created by Fundação Getúlio Vargas a couple of years ago is to first, on the one hand, study what are the metrics and methodologies according to which we evaluate what is green in the food system, and secondly, identify the gaps, but also the opportunities that it suggests to us. And I'm going to share 3 cases, if we have the time, otherwise only 2. The first case is an experience that I personally had 3 years ago when I started working with these challenges in Brazil. A Chinese company, pressed by the government to transition its engine system, to give up biodiesel, give up the use of kerosene, and substitute the energy of the airplane by a sustainable source, began investigating possibilities of using ethanol from Brazil, made out of sugarcane, ethanol made in the US out of corn, or biodiesel made of canola in Europe. And after a couple of interactions with us, the company just disappeared. We asked them what had happened. So why you're not talking to us anymore? And the answer was, well, the Brazilian ethanol leads to deforestation in the Amazon. We responded saying, look, but our ethanol is produced in São Paulo, which is 2,500 kilometers away from the frontier of the Amazon. And therefore, there's no direct connection between what we do in São Paulo and the trees in the Amazon. It would be equivalent to saying that someone is going to plant a tree of eucalyptus in Sicily, in the south of Italy, and trees will begin to fall in London, in the north of Great Britain. But the answer was, well, even though there's no direct connection between what you do in São Paulo and what happens in the Amazon, there's an indirect connection, which is established by some standards that are becoming increasingly influential in the global market, and that are called ILUC, Indirect Land Use Change. And currently, there are 2 main standards of ILUC that have popularized and influenced global decisions taken by investors, by companies like this Chinese one, but also by commercial relationships every day. The most influential global ILUC standard is established by the US, the GTAP, the Global Trade Analysis Protocol, which is created by the University of Purdue. And it is a regulatory standard according to which the US market works, but many investors have adopted as a reference. Europe has also its ILUC standard, which is set by Globion. They currently interact with one another, but in common, they all assume that whatever we do in Brazil, in the south, in the southeast, in the northeast, will inevitably lead to impacts in deforestation in the Amazon. We know that there are different standards. different models of economic evaluation of impact. And we know that they have different impact in reality in Brazil. So some of the research that has developed in the country over the last years has tried to show the limits of these traditional standards and to show the reality of what kind of impact effectively happens in Brazil. Embrapa, our research institution, developed over the last years what they call the Brazilian iLook model, BR-Look, which is based on the Brazilian data, and that takes into account information that are more precise according to the Brazilian reality, taking into account two particular differences of our productive system. First, in contrast to what happens in the US and in Europe, in Brazil, for each hectare of crop, we have 2 or 3 hectares of degraded land, which could be easily incorporated into the productive system without pushing the pressure of the land use frontier and therefore pressing deforestation. None of this is considered by the international model. Secondly, because we are a tropical country and because we still have a margin of technological development, we tend to have 2 or 3 crops over the same land, in contrast to Europe, in which you have once per year. Half of the year, the soil is frozen, therefore not productive at all. But these criteria are not considered by these international standards, even though they have become the second language of the international market. Brazil is very much concerned about that, because we know that what happens in the biofuel system and affects soybeans commerce, ethanol, and other goods might also increasingly impact other commodities. Denmark has just yesterday announced its interest in donating resources to support a national policy to recover degraded lands in Brazil, but under one condition, that our policies in Brazil pass the standard of the European iLook model. Impossible. So what the point here is unless we are able to qualify, specify, and advance our own science to measure our reality according to our own standards, then if you're not able to do that, increasing economic barriers might be set based on standards that are developed by other countries. Either we have our own standard of evaluation or a foreign standard will apply to us. Some quick information just to show the particulars of the Brazilian reality. We know that there are foreign databases that serve as a standard based on which you evaluate the carbon impact, the carbon footprint of diverse goods. And some of these databases at FAO, some of the databases are international institutions. They all, to some extent, inform economic decisions taken abroad, according to which you evaluate what is green and what is not. Bayer, in connection with Embrapa, made a recent research / system organizing producers to measure exactly the carbon footprint of productions. And what I'd like just to stress here is this. The blue area is the area of so-called land use change impact. And the international databases, they all assume that the majority of the carbon footprint of our production is in the use of land impact. And the green part is the part of the emissions that take place as the productive process. Look what the Pro-Carbon, which is the Bayer project developed in Brazil, with concrete evidence from 1,000 farms shows. The reality is much different. And this is true in the soy case, as it is true in other areas of production as well. This, for those who don't know, is just a graphic that is showing the trajectory of the use of land and production in the country. The area of the yellow area is the area of land that Brazil uses to produce all crops in the country, and the gray line is our production over the years. So this is the trajectory of our production growth over the years, and the trajectory of the use of land in the country. So what happened over the years, since the year 2000 at least, is that the area of land used to produce food in Brazil doubled, and our production multiplied by 4 times. This shows that the capacity to use land to produce goods has become much more efficient over time. Our efficiencies of the use of natural resources is growing significantly, yet this efficiency in the natural deployment of goods, of how we use nature, is not properly captured by standards of sustainability that we use today. This is another study that we did at the Bioeconomy Observatory that tries to suggest pathways that the country should embrace in order to foster the decarbonization of our production. And we did this for some commodities. I'm showing here one graph that has to do with the soybean production. So what we did was to assess, based on the experience of the recent years, the average of emissions and the projection of emissions in the next 10 years in the country, until 2030. And depending on the system of production that we incorporate, depending on how we improve the way we produce goods, this is what happens with the net result of carbon emissions. The gray zone is if we're able to incorporate 10% of forest plantation, of forest, combined with integrated system with soybeans. And the dark blue is if we plant 20% of the area of forest, and so on. But the message is clear. If we are able to plant even a tiny part of forest combined with soybeans in the country, our system might become highly negative in terms of net balance. I'm going to share a second story very quickly. I visited a couple of months ago one of the most prestigious farms in Brazil, considered one of the landmarks, one of the paradigms in production system. And this is a farm that is also one of the leading exports of meat in the country. And the question that they asked me was this: look, we are facing increasing barriers and threats coming from abroad, and we don't know what else to do because we have incorporated every single policy, every single suggestion to make our productive system sustainable. Yet, the response that we often get is meat is meat. And therefore, either we stop meat production or deforestation and sustainability might never be achieved. And therefore, the question was, what do we do? What the problem is the traditional standards according to which we evaluate the export of meat is very much biased. And we try to show with this study how it is important to evaluate and assess meat production according to the particulars of the system in Brazil. And some variations were taken into account, and we try to show in two graphs these variations. One is this: depending on the system of production, the net result of the carbon footprint might be radically different. Therefore, it's not enough just to use or to assimilate the standard of emissions that is often set as an average by the IPCC. You need to be able to understand what are the particulars of the system of production. That's the first concern. The second concern is that if your system is able to remove carbon, and how much it is able to remove carbon, then the net result of the system might also be radically different. So what we did here was to compare three systems of production, depending on whether you're using one animal per hectare, 2 animals per hectare, and the time of the cycle of production of each of the animals. And we calculate the emissions and removal that happens as a result of the photosynthesis growth of the pasture for each of the systems, contrasting them, and then showing in the country, in each of the states, how these particulars actually indicate the pros and the negative aspects of our production and how we should present ourselves. Why? Because when we talk abroad, very often, there's one number or one standard. And this standard comes as already the mark, already the truth that we should just assimilate or accept without any questioning. I'm going to come to the end here because I'm talking for too long. But the last one has to do with methane emissions. We all know that one of the critical elements of meat production now is emission of methane. And we know that in contrast to what happens with CO2 emissions, methane is still, to a large extent, going through the process of establishment of the proper metrics according to which the system is going to operate. There are debates on what the best metrics are, and their impacts might be radically different. So what we did here was to take the different metrics that are available in international discussions on climate change and to evaluate the impact of each of these metrics in the Brazilian carbon footprint of livestock production. So if we use, for example, the red line is the number of animals in our livestock system. And what you see is that every one of the metrics tends to grow in relative proportion to the number of animals in our system, with one exception. And the exception is the so-called GWP star. GWP star is sometimes called the new metric, the new proposal of how to properly evaluate and assess the warming potential of methane. It was developed by an Oxford scientist, a physicist called Myers Allen, who's also a member of IPCC, who published a couple of papers that have been quite influential in international debates. And what Alan claims is that methane is not properly assessed by the traditional standards because it has very particular features. On the one hand, it lives for a very short time in the atmosphere, around 12 years, but on the other hand, it has a very significant warming potential. But the way we calculate how this balance of the warming potential of methane takes place must be improved, according to Miles Allen. What's the point? The point is, depending on which of the metrics we use, we might assess the sustainability of meat production in very different ways. And I think this is very important to us, especially in the South, for a second reason. And this is a point that not even GWP Star takes seriously enough, in my view. So, usually when we talk about warming potential of methane, we tend to look at the oil systems, which is a system that basically emits. But we know that in our systems of production in Latin America, the livestock production in an open grassland has a very powerful potential to sequester carbon, right? To remove carbon. And depending on how much we are able to remove, improving the quality of the pasture, recovering degraded land, improving techniques according to which you produce, combining systems, as we do in Brazil quite often, this process might be highly negative. And here's the key point. What happens to methane is this. Methane, methane is very much dependent on the flow of the source. So if the source of emission of methane grows, then the warming potential grows exponentially. But if the source decreases, then what happens to methane is not that it's going to warm up the atmosphere, but the opposite. It's going to cool down the atmosphere. And this is not just my opinion. This is what Miles Allen says. And if this is so obvious, then one question is, why shouldn't the IPCC acknowledge it? The IPCC does it. In the last report, R6, chapter 7, page 137, he says that if we are, the way we are measuring methane, especially in food production, tends to overestimate emissions that takes place in the food system by 4 or 5 times. Therefore, there is a need to understand this proper science and to be able to use it in our realities, to improve the quality of our assessment and therefore of the results of our emissions. And here I come to the end. In the Bioeconomy Observatory, what we're doing is gathering all the information that have been produced by different scientific organizations in Brazil, beginning with Embrapa. Some of the members that participate in our organization are former researchers of Embrapa, some are economists, some are regulators, and we're trying to gather all that information and identify where the gaps are and how the country should move forward in order to improve our capacity to assess with the best precision emissions that take place in tropical production in Brazil, and therefore also to suggest the most prolific areas or the most promising areas where we should grow over the next years. We have a lot of information. We're still very much interested in developing better science, learning from our neighbors. I'd be happy to collaborate, and I'm very happy to join you in this discussion.
Thank you, Daniel. You've made some clear points. So I'm going to ask Ignacio to.
Thank you. I know we are all tired from these very long days, but we should be very happy to be here talking about these topics and knowing all the things we can do. So in my case, I'm going to present one project that involved multiple institutions from Uruguay, the livestock minister, the environment minister, the National Institute for Meat, Dairy, Agri-Research, and also experts from the University of the Republic. That it's called Livestock Environmental Footprint. So the presentation will be divided in 4 parts. First, I will try to answer the question regarding why a livestock environmental footprint is important for Uruguay. Then we will talk about the objectives and the structure of this state policy. Then we move on to the methodology and the results, especially on greenhouse gas emissions, as we are in COP. And then what are the conclusions and next steps of this project. So, as you may know, Uruguay is located in the Pampa biome, as we can see in this land use map, we see on yellow the regions of the country that the main land use is agriculture. That is the west and southwest regions mainly, that are the more fertile soils. But our main ecosystem that is on the majority on the surface is natural grasslands in light brown. In Uruguay, we are 3.5 million inhabitants, and we have a herd of 12 million cows. So each Uruguayan takes care of 4 cows. As you may deduce or know, as for a relatively uninhabited country as Uruguay, which has a very good availability of land, a very good rainfall regime, agribusiness should be very important. And in fact, it is 75% of our exports come from the agribusiness. We always say that we feed 40 million people, and we are 3. It employs 1 in 6 workers in the country, and if you account the agro industry, the primary sector, and the related activities, the GDP, we account 25% of our GDP. So, as it is our main economical activity, it's also the main source of greenhouse gas emissions. If we measure with GWP, the agribusiness represents 75% of emissions, and of all our emissions, 50% is methane. And of course, methane comes mainly from our livestock. 90% of this enteric fermentation is from bovine that are used in beef production. So, if we take into consideration the economical importance of beef production and the impact on greenhouse gases, is why doing this livestock environmental footprint is so important. So important to be considered a state policy. So this picture is a bit old. In May 2021, we were still using masks for COVID. Here is, we can see there the former Minister of Environment, the Minister of Livestock that is here, and representatives from all these national institutes I mentioned, meat, dairy, and agri-research. This was the launch of this project, and it was said that it's a tool to allow us to measure the environmental impact of beef and dairy production at the national level from an integral perspective. And this, I think, is important, not just focusing on greenhouse gas emissions, but also accounting for water, soil, and biodiversity. So, well, these representatives from these institutions conform the coordination group that were in charge of leading the project, and more than 40 professionals from these institutions conform the technical groups in charge of determining the indicators and gathering the data. These technical groups were water, greenhouse gas, biodiversity, and soil. I personally took part in the water technical group. And the indicators should include beef production, dairy production, and the results were published in October 2022. So now moving on to the methodology and results. For beef production, in the case of greenhouse gas emissions, the year of the data and the indicators were from 2019. In this case, direct animal emissions were measured in the form of methane and nitrous oxide, according to the IPCC guidelines. And how we do this is we segmented the herd in categories with diets according to locations. And, well, the national emission factors of the cattle was according to the forage balance and land use of each region. In this case, feedlots are not included. And the meat production, the amount of beef produced is accounted based on traceability and our electronic sales weights. So this is the first indicator I want to show you today. That is emission intensity per region of the country. Emission intensity, as you may know, is the amount of CO2 equivalents emitted per kilogram of beef produced. We can see in dark blue regions, in dark blue areas of the map, where we have higher emissions intensity, more greenhouse gas emissions per kilogram of beef produced. And this is associated with those regions of the country where the cow-calf systems, cow-calf extensive systems are predominant in those mainly in those regions of the country where agriculture is not a main land use. If we move to the west of the country and the south, we see that there are lighter colors. This indicates lower emissions intensity, so less emissions per kilogram of beef. The average of the country was 18.6 kilograms of CO2 equivalents per kilogram of beef produced in live weight. So the other side of the coin regarding emissions, I think is emissions per hectare. In general, those systems that has less emissions intensity has more emissions per hectare because they are more intensive, and so is the case. In regions of the country, we see in dark colors, we have more emissions per hectare that are those regions of the country that has implanted pastures or seasonal pastures that are used for intensive grazing, for finishing systems. So there are more animals per hectare and more emissions per hectare. So moving on to greenhouse gas in dairy production. In this case, the data was also from 2019, sorry, but a partial life cycle assessment was made from cradle to gate. The estimations were at a farm level, according to typology of the farm, and according to the guidelines of IPCC, IDF, and LEAP. In this case, the footprint components were enteric fermentation and manure management in the form of methane, and nitrous oxide from manure management, and also from dung and urine. Emissions from the feed production were also accounted at a farm level, but also those produced out of farm. And also there is accountability of emissions from the electric usage. First, I would like to show you what is the carbon footprint breakdown. We see that 60% of emissions from the dairy and dairy production are in the form of methane, 26% in the form of nitrous oxide, and 13% associated with feed production. As you may see, there is almost non-emissions from electric usage due to our renewable matrix of electric generation. The national footprint of the dairy reproduces almost 1 kilogram of CO2 equivalents per kilogram of milk produced. It's also interesting to look how carbon footprint changed with the productivity of the farms. As we see in the table, in general, those farms that have more productivity, more liters of milk produced per cow per day, has less carbon footprint. Just to show you, the focus of today is greenhouse gas, but as we think that it's important to look an integral view, have an integral perspective of all, just to show you some biodiversity index, that in general, we see those regions of the country where livestock is the main activity, has also better indicators regarding biodiversity. So it's important to know that there are trade-offs. Maybe if we improve in some aspect of environmental impact, we will be going against having negative impact on another element, so we have to take in consideration all aspects. And also, the footprint will not be complete if we don't take into consideration what happens at the industrial level. So also, this project worked on the indicators of the industry, in this case, slaughterhouses. For example, what are the nutrients and organic matter that are exported to water courses, for example, in the wastewater, also the solid waste that is generated, and also water and energy consumption. So 15 indicators were determined in this case for livestock environmental footprint for dairy and beef production. Not only greenhouse gas emissions were measured. This is because, as we mentioned, the importance of considering all aspects for the eventual trade-offs that may be. We have now a baseline, and we can perform actions to improve this baseline. But we got some things to do regarding this project that, for example, it could be establish investigation lines to improve the measurements and improve the information we have. And also, it's important to make continuous improvement on our measures. So this is just a brief and quick view of this project that it was long and has a lot of things to do next, but if you have any question, we will be gladly to answer. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ignacio. It was really informative and interesting, your presentation. Now we have some time for some questions. I would like to hear the different perspectives from farmers, from the scientists, and the National Institute in Uruguay. And well, as you have stated, and as we have here today, the development of science-based indicators is paramount. So, what are the main challenges that you are facing in this process, Marcelo?
Well, I believe that I said that the important issue is connecting all this experience. We have a lot of information. We need to protocolize the way we are measuring capture emissions, ultimately the balance. This is the most important, and try to build a relay channel between farmers and consumers in order the consumer could, by choosing the products, promote or scale and regenerative agriculture, of course, with solutions based in science, but we need to have strong indicators that allow the consumers and farmers agree in. We need to combine productivity plus efficiency, and this is our challenge. I believe we have a lot of knowledge. We have technological improvements also, but we need to articulate better between farmers, researchers, industry, in order and protocolize the way we are measuring capture and emissions. You're welcome.
Thank you. Daniel, could you share your thoughts?
So I'll share three concerns that are very much being debated in Brazil at the moment. And one of the stands of Brazil here at COP is right over there. And it's just interesting that what I'm going to say here are questions that are often being discussed over there at this very moment. So the first challenge has to do with the factors of production. So Brazil did a relatively good job in tropicalizing part of these factors. So we have tier 2 national factors for nearly every single good produced in Brazil. And here there are two particular challenges. One is to move to tier 3, which is obviously much harder, but there's already an impulse and an interest in doing that. But secondly, and most important, developing factors of production for systems of production, for particular systems. So not just meat or dairy, but depending on how you produce, depending on whether this production takes place in the Amazon, in the Pampas, in the northeast of the country, because the number varies, and the qualities of the system also vary. So doing that is particularly important because otherwise, the risk that we face, and we are facing that, is that you have an average that is far from precise to represent the reality of what takes place in the country. So to give you one example, what the emission of a system of production of meat in the northeast of Brazil is 3 times higher than the average of what takes place in the southeast, which is much more efficient. Secondly, and I think this might be the most important one, developing the methodologies according to which we assess and attribute the responsibility for emissions. Because one thing is to have a number. A second thing is to say, in your system, I will calculate your emission according to this standard. And here I think the main gap is the definition of the baseline. The standard, the initial point from where you're going to evaluate how much emission or removal takes place in each production system. So the baselines have not been established in the country. A new institute has recently been created in São Paulo in order to elaborate the first standards of baseline that I think are very important. And third, and maybe the most important one, obviously has to do with how we're going to involve farmers in this project. We know that, oh, the system might be marvelous, very efficient, very rigorous, but unless we're able to create the bridge that actually invites farmers to look at this system as an opportunity to some extent, we might not be able to really expand and universalize these instruments that are now being discussed and constructed in the country, so that it effectively helps them in improving their production and by doing so also contributing to the sustainability.
Thank you.
I agree with my colleagues. Just want to add that, as Francisco said, if we are the region that exports the most amount of food to the world, we should work together and unify our methodology and unify our speech to have strength and to negotiate together. So this is one challenge, I think. And the other one is, as you said, to reach the producers that nowadays are not seeing any economical incentives to be more efficient or to change their practices, as market is not paying, or at least is the way I see it. In the case of beef, there are some initiatives, but are very small, I think, and producer doesn't get paid more for being more efficient nowadays.
Can I add one point very quickly? So I think there's a public task here that the countries might eventually consider collaborating, which for me is decisive. So what we see going on in Brazil now is that some farmers, which are usually large, very efficient, very successful, they're able to hire particular scientists or supporters to measure their carbon footprint, to certify their goods, and therefore to do what needs to be done in order to show the sustainability of their production. But this cannot be done by the majority of the productions on their own. It's very expensive to carry forward this process individually. To dig the ground and take a piece of land, bring to the laboratory in Brazil, it's going to cost between 300 and 400 reais. If you do one piece of measurement for hectare, imagine one farm with 1,000 hectares is going to have 1,000 pieces of land that are going to be brought to be evaluated in these chemical laboratories, and it's too expensive to be done. So the question is whether the country is going to be able, or the region is going to be able, to create a public infrastructure which standardizes with rigor and quality what are the numbers that are rigorous enough, that are trustworthy enough, and made those numbers available to all producers so that they can already show the quality of their goods without needing to hire someone, a consultant, an agronomist, or eventually a lawyer to support them with this measurement. So there's the challenge of creating this public infrastructure of the carbon footprint for each of the goods that we produce in each hectare, in each piece of land in the countries. I think this is a key challenge for us over the next years.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience? No? Okay.
Thank you. As we saw during all these days and meetings, our activity as farmers, ranchers, is being perceived, right? There is a perception that somehow is part of the problem that has negative consequences. And well, I would like to ask you, each one of you, all of you, to to give your idea on what actions we should pursue, what initiatives you think that. I think one relevant today is the importance of ICA leading this since last year at COP27 and now at COP28. But I would like to hear your point of view. Thanks. Oh, sorry.
Well, I think it's important that the private sector comes more to COP. In my case, from Uruguay, I don't know if there are many privates that are here. It's mainly the public sector. So it could be very good to involve them in this discussion and to know what's going on here. So apart from being here, it's important to communicate what's going on. So, and well, I think that could be very beneficial for the sector.
As for the same for us, I believe that it's important to be here, have these conversations, have building a networking with industry, financial organism, and tech companies, other farmers all over the world. We need to build a holistic vision. We have a big problem. We are part, all of us are part of the solution of the problem at the same time. It's common to her, I am not part of the problem, I am part of the solution, but I think all of us are part of the problem and the solution at the same time. We need to work together. It's not easy to have indicators we could share and compare between subtropical, template, livestock production, agriculture. It's very, very hard. We need to work on this. The first COP, I said, the first challenge was the Argentinian, for us. In our country, the Argentinian organizations work together. The second step, we need to work together in the region with Uruguay, Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina. We need to try to compare and to learn together, created societies that learn and share information. Listen to you, it's not easy to compare our practice models, but we need to try to, this is a big challenge. We need to push that idea and actions.
Yeah, I do think we need to learn from one another. These policies, in my view, they must become a priority in our countries. I think they are key strategic knowledge that might influence our capacity to access markets and also to grow in the near future. But I also think there's a diplomatic challenge, which is at the same time scientific and political and global. And I think that needs to be taken into account, and I'd like to give one final example in 1 minute. When we talk about what is green in the climate governance system, we're not talking about a color. We're talking about the criteria according to which you're going to evaluate what is sustainable and what is not. And this criteria is still under construction, as are being discussed here. And some of them are established according to realities that might be taken into account and might be questioned. And let me give you one concrete example of what's going on right now. According to the IPCC, an oil company that is based, let's say, in Norway, digs oil from the ground, sells the oil to the Netherlands, processes the oil there, sells to Italy. Italy uses the oil in its public transport system. Who is responsible for most of the emissions taking place from the burning of the oil? And the answer is the consumption country. So it doesn't matter how much oil Norway or the United Emirates dig from the ground. As long as the oil is exported, the responsibility for carbon emissions and therefore for the climate problem is on the hands of those that buy and consume the oil, not the producer. Now take the case of food. Let's take the case of a country, Uruguay, that produces food that supports, that nurtures 40 million people in the world, if I understood well. And therefore, Uruguay produces the food there, sells it, and it's going to be consumed somewhere else. Who is in charge of the emissions of the food production system? Uruguay. So in the case of oil, the attribution of emissions is mainly at the destiny. In the case of food, it's mainly at the origin. So the consequences are quite significant and must be taken into account. And here are two, one of them already mentioned. It doesn't matter how much oil you take out of the ground. As long as you sell it, you are green. It should be no coincidence that Norway is at the top of every ranking of sustainability in the world. Because when you look inside Norway, most of the energy used by Norway is from hydroelectric sources and therefore green. At the same time, the country is expanding oil extraction in the deep ocean, but selling out to the rest of the world. Norway is not in charge of that. Okay? Now take the opposite. We're looking at Africa, and we see the concern that many countries has with food security and the necessity that they have to expand the access to food. But the very first moment an African country touches the ground, it's already threatening the environment. Is that fair? Or should we question those criteria according to which we distribute the responsibility for what is green and what is not in the world? What I'm claiming here is not that we should not work for a green transition with our priority. I'm not questioning the fact that some of the burden is in the hands of producers, and countries like ours must take responsibility for that. But at the same time, we need to do it according to fair criteria and according to rigorous science. And I think there's a huge gap in those two areas.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Well, to sum up, um, I wanted to mention that you have done a great job in this integration and characterization process about the production systems in the south of America. So I would like to ask Francisco, what would be the next steps in this process, and how are you going to move forward?
Okay. It's, it's like this one? Okay. Uh, the life motive of GPS is something you have said, all of you have said, that is the integration, the work together with all these 4 countries, showing all the results of the works of you, but doing that bridge that you claim. The bridge between the producers, the agribusiness, the agro-industry, the consumers. Why? Because in each forum, in each country, GPS has farmers, associations of farmers, have associations of agro-industries, have chambers of commerce, and that motive, that is the integration and the investigation and all the research you can do, we can put it all together, but also the communication and the transmission of the knowledge to the diplomatics, the foreign offices of the countries, to everybody who had to negotiate, and for the guys that are studying for being diplomats. We are doing that in all the countries. Our mission in the life is to join people, to investigate, and to communicate. We know that there are a lot of things to do, a lot of improvement we have to do. We are aware of that. But we think that we have to work in knowledge, work in science, work in communication, work in integration. And I said at the beginning that the 4 countries, the 4 forums of GPS in these countries, have decided to work together. You are an example of that. We have to continue. We know also that all this Southern Cone has a big potential of mitigation and capture of carbon, but we are very especially involved in the adaptation, because our extensive way of work makes that we primarily care of that, because we have a lot of little farmers, a lot of vulnerable people, as said our minister today, that is involved in that. So adaptation is very important for us. We have to work not only in mitigation and in capture, we have to work a lot in adaptation in these countries. in this sense, agriculture is one of the part of the problem, but the solution, part of the solution. Okay, that's right, but we need the international corporation, the international cooperation in economic things, in technological things, and in science things. They collaborate with us for doing all that. So we need everything that, and the next steps are that. In not only the first step is what we are doing today, you mentioned all that. Second step is measure, put signs, put indicators, compare the indicators, and then start communicating and start improving and implementing all these politics of climate change, etc. That's the idea.
One important advantage of our countries is the farmers are involved in the process. It's not common if you have a global vision. In other countries, the farmers are not involved in the process, not involved in the discussions. It's a huge advantage for Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina. The farmers are involved in the process. This is really a huge advantage we have. We need to take advantage of this.
One great example is the in the no-tilling, direct sowing is one of the examples. In these countries, 30 years ago, we started doing.
Because we need to adapt,
This
for
is
example, this technology to different environments, and the other farmers adapt higher, in a rate higher, this technology when the farmers see other farmers introduce some better, the other farmers imitate this, and this is important. Involve the farmers in the process.
I think that the great conclusion is we know that we have a lot of things to do. We are capable of doing, and we will do it. So, thanks everybody.
Thank you.